Hey, Dan Lucinski, Dark Angel Cutlery. And today we are outside in the beautiful weather and enjoying the nice day. And we have the We the People Bowie here with us. And the Bowie is mechanically finished. We have a nice Damascus pommel crown here that's been carved with hand files, and it's been etched, but we had to do a little filing on the sides, and we'll have to re-etch that to get our texture or etch in the Damascus brought back out, because some of the filing did incur loss of the etch, but not a big deal. We also have our spacer here that we made at the junction or the union where the handle meets the guard, and we have a nice figured maple handle. The handle's been sanded to 2000 grit at this point, and we're going to be putting some tung oil on the handle. Once we put the tung oil on the handle, we're going to get a great reveal, and that's part of what I wanted to share in this video today. Aside from that, you'll see I've got some masking tape here, and a stencil for our We the People etch. And to etch this 80 CRV2 massive blade, we're going to be using some Perma blue gun bluing, and this is a paste type of gun bluing, and works really well. And basically, we'll put this on, and then we're going to leave this on for a while. And it says that repeat the steps 4 through 7 to obtain a darker blue, which basically, without reading all the steps, removing and re-etching multiple times gets you a darker blue finish. We've got a stencil on here, so I've got to do that while preserving the stencil. So if I remove the paste, I've got to be careful not to remove any of the centerpieces on the lettering. You'll see that within the center of the E's, there are very small decals in there that are glued down to the blade. So those can come up. But without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to use Q-tips to apply the gun bluing paste, or yeah, we'll apply that in the stencil area. And we don't need a lot of excess. You basically, we've cleaned the blade already. I used mineral spirits, and then I used also Windex afterwards, just to kind of neutralize any acids and get off any finger or hand grease that might be on the blade. That's just kind of the preparation work before you use something like this. This is an acid, and it's corrosive, and it's going to eat away at the finish in the steel to create black lettering where we have that stenciled out. So as long as all the oils are removed and the surface is clean, we should get a nice clean etch from our paste gun bluing. So let's get started. And I've done this a few times. I've had this for a little while, but I'm going to shake it up just as well. And we'll apply. I usually squeeze a little bit out just to make sure it's flowing evenly and we don't have any like thin stuff coming out first. So sometimes when your toothpaste sits, you get some separation and you get some liquidy stuff come out first. We don't want that. So basically, I'm gonna squeeze out a nice glob, get it started, and I'll just follow the lettering with the tube best I can, and then I'll take the Q-tip and I'll spread this out onto the lettering and just make sure we cover all the areas. So just kind of go over here as fast as I can, because we don't want it to etch unevenly, and if I leave a glob sitting on one part of the letter and I don't get the rest of the letter covered fast enough, we'll get an uneven etch, because you'll have some on there longer doing more work, and we want it to just evenly do the work across the areas that are open in the stencil here. So now we're just going to spread it out, and we're going to get that paste just evenly distributed over the letters. And you'll see some of it's thicker than the rest. That's why I mentioned squeezing some out and shaking it up is really good, because this stuff does kind of coagulate in the bottle over time, and it does kind of clump up in there. So, you know, I don't know what they use for, you know, creating this into a paste. I mean, usually when I've used gun blue in the past, it's a very thin liquid, and like I said, this is an acid. It's a corrosive. But, you know, we've got multiple chemical properties in here in this paste, so we want to make sure that we get an even distribution of the chemicals and of what's inside of this paste. So we've got a lot extra on here. I was pretty generous with it. You probably don't need that much. I've used this on firearms too, which is what it's intended for, to touch up gun bluing. And you know, if you're familiar with gun bluing, this is what they call a cold blue. You don't need it to be hot to blue. You know, we're out here in nice cool spring weather. I think it's maybe 55 degrees out here right now, so it's probably not the best temperature for doing this, but I think we're fine because this acid is gonna do its job either way. So we get this evenly distributed on there. I can already see it darkening up the steel. I don't know what you guys can see on film, but it's looking good so far. We've got a bit of touch-up work to do on this blade also once we get this unmasked and we have our desired effect. And basically we'll have to we'll clean this off after it etches, and we'll see what we got before we take the stencil off. If we have to apply another coat, we will. And let's let this sit and do its job. And right now I'm just gonna make sure I got nothing on my hands here, and I'm gonna flip this over. And our doggy's getting in the shot here for a minute, but that's okay. We're gonna flip this over, and I've been trying not to touch the handle too, because I'm gonna do some tung oil finish on the handle while we got the video rolling, and you'll see the reveal of the maple finish, which is gonna be fantastic. And I think we'll go with the same amount of globs here, and we'll just try to spread it out the same way. And be generous with this stuff, because you know, put a lot of work into this blade, and probably a lot more money in the blade than there is in this little jar of bluing. So we use as much as we need and be as generous as we have to be with it. And then we're gonna spread it out now. We've got our second side. And before I put the masking on the blade, what I did was I marked, I took one single piece of masking paper, and after I put one stencil down, I centered it on the brass, but then I took a masking tape and I went around and up over the blade catch to mark where my stencil was centered on this side, because I wanted it to be even on both sides. Hi, Abel. I think Doggy wants to get in the shot here. Just stay away from the bluing, Abel. That's no good for doggies. So we're gonna get this all spread out real good, and we'll let this paste sit and do its job. And you know, even while this is sitting, we can get to work on the tung oil finish. I usually don't like to multitask when I'm doing stuff like this, because it can distract me from my goals, but I think we're gonna be all right. I also have to be careful because we've got a little gun bluing now on this plastic here, and worst case scenario would be this plastic coming loose from the board and blowing up and getting on another part of the blade that hasn't been masked off. You see, I took masking tape and went over my stencil here and kind of went outside of the box here, just so I didn't have the chance that there was going to be, well, minimize the chance that there's going to be gun bluing overreaching our area. So that's not something we want to happen. That's not an ideal scenario. So we'll just be as careful as possible. Even though we've got some on this plastic now, we're just going to leave the Bowie down where it's at. And when we apply our tung oil, we'll flip it, but we'll try to keep it in the same spot. So even if we get some on the other side, it's just going to touch down on the same spot on the opposite side of the Bowie. So we won't end up with gun bluing in an undesired area. So, I mean, I'm not too concerned about removing this gun bluing right away. There's going to be some carbonization, or carbon that builds up on the surface as it etches, because it'll be it'll basically being it's like a sped up corrosive. It's kind of like when your steel rusts, but it's a really hyper fast aging process that this causes. And like everything, when things age and when they rust, you get like a scale buildup. So I don't want too much scale buildup on my gun bluing, because that'll prevent the bluing from getting deeper. That's why it says to do multiple coats, multiple layers. We also don't want it to go under our stencil. I mentioned that there were these little decals in the centers of those letters that separated the letters, and I don't want the bluing to get underneath that, because then we would lose our definition of our characters and our letters. So let's go ahead and let's do a reveal. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to do more work on the handle. There might be some rough spots on this handle, but it's kind of hard to see it. And I don't have the best eyes. You see, I'm wearing reading glasses here, but we can go ahead and use the tung oil on this. And normally after I use tung oil, this is kind of like it's not a urethane, but this is a coating similar to urethane. It's like a stabilizing agent, and once we cover the handle in this, it's going to seal the handle. I go ahead and I take the buffer afterwards and I buff up this sealant. And you see I'm going to apply it with an old toothbrush here, but the toothbrush is nice and clean and the bristles are really soft, so it's going to apply it pretty smooth. But after this coats, I buff it, and I'll get a good look at what this finish looks like. If there is anything that has been that isn't sanded really well, I see some spots here in near the pommel, and there is a little bit more work I want to do in that area. But at least by doing this, I'm going to shake this up a little bit before we start. At least by doing this, it'll give me an idea of what the finish is going to look like. It's going to give me a glimpse at the finished product here, even before buffing. So let's go ahead and give this a go. I'm just going to move my bluing here. And I'll apply this to the toothbrush over the napkin here, so it hits that instead of our table. And this is kind of an exciting part, so hope you enjoy the reveal here. This is going to get us a nice peek at what our maple finish looks like. And this is stabilized figured maple, so we just got to try not to breathe any of this stuff in. It is really nasty stuff, so. And I'm not wearing a chemical respirator or anything here right now, but you see this stuff has been around for about a year or so. I've had it, maybe plus, but I've got a little bit of thick stuff coming out. That might have been around the edge of the jar when I poured it. So, and nice looking wood. We got that nice figuring there, and now we're gonna just flip this over. And like I said, we're gonna try to keep the bluing close to where we were working, because we don't want bluing where there's wood, and we certainly don't want tung oil where there's bluing. And what a nice reveal on this. Like I said, I sanded to 2000 grit, so we got a nice smooth finish on here, and this is going to buff out really brilliantly. Toothbrush really isn't the ideal applicator, but it's what I got right now. You see we got a little bit of bubbling. Those bubbles will flatten as this dries. Like I said, we're going to buff this as well, so not a big problem that we're using a toothbrush. Like I said, it's not ideal, but for what we're doing, it's going to be just fine. And it darkened up a bit, which I like. I was aware that this was a dyed figured maple, and I figured we'd get some of that, but I don't want to play with this too much, but I'd really like to get a shot of this in the light so we can see just what we did here. So just make sure we don't get any bluing on it, but that figuring is just gorgeous. And once this tung oil dries, it's going to look like glass on here, and you see that figuring actually moves in the light. It gives you a really beautiful play on the eyes, and it's I love it, beautiful stuff. So I like that we got these shocks of blonde in here. That's the front of the handle, front of the blade. So, but a little bit of work left to do on the pommel, just kind of straightening it out. And I mentioned that I need to etch or re-etch that area, and yeah, so just to double check we're not getting any bluing on our other parts of our blade where it's undesired. And just try to smooth out these bubbles. Like I mentioned, we can we're gonna buff this out. We can actually take a high grit sandpaper even as well, and sand out those bubbles after this dries. But pretty good. These are not ideal conditions. Like I said, it's a little chilly out here. We're gonna take any over drippage off here, and as the tung oil flattens, we're gonna bring this inside, and we're gonna get it in some warmer temperatures. Just double check this side as well. There's a little bit of drip there. I did go kind of heavy with this stuff, so we're definitely going to be doing some sanding. And like I said, we got more pommel work to do, but just a gorgeous wood, beautiful wood. It's everything I anticipated. Maybe a little darker than I anticipated, but that could be the tung oil too. This is a real heavy coat of tung oil, and it's going to be cleaned up. And I'm sure you saw in the video before we got started that I had some dark spots just below the collar or the spacer there, and that was where I used some gap filler, and that stuff is from Bob Smith's Industries, and that is an CA, whatever that stands for. It's a CA glue, or like a super glue, and same composition as super glue, but gap filler is like a thicker syrupy kind of medium to it, and that will pour in and fill in gaps and spots in your projects. I used a little bit along the blade catch. Probably can't get it on the video right now, but that's got to get cleaned up too. So when I put the blade catch on, I pinned it with 1/8 inch brass pins, but I also used some epoxy that I had, and there were a few spots where the epoxy didn't get, so I went back with that gap filler, and I just kind of squeezed a little bit, and I turned the blade upside down, and gravity kind of takes the super glue in, or the gap filler, and it drips down into the cracks where you have little cracks and voids you want to fill. And we didn't want to leave any areas below that blade catch where there was no glue or no sealant, because this is 80 CRV2 steel, and 80 CRV2 steel is corrosive, and it can rust, so we wanted to seal that completely before we finished, and we achieved what we wanted, so I'm real happy with that. I'm real happy with the way this is looking. Again, that gap filler, you can't even really see it right now. Once we put this tung oil on, it seals it up the same way the gap filler did, more or less, but it achieves a really tight seal and a bond that is very similar, so it blends right in nicely. But that's what I got for today, or for now. Just going to kind of smooth out this gun bluing, make sure it's evenly covered over the people here. Usually doesn't take long to leave gun bluing on. I think it's like a 15-minute process. It's already it's done its job now. It's nice and dark. I'm just going to kind of keep it really evenly distributed on the project while it etches. We'll just kind of mix it around a little bit, make sure we get the acid to all the areas of the artwork. And I think that's good. I think we look really good there. Stinky stuff. When you guys are using this stuff, if you do use it, make sure you use a chemical respirator. A dust respirator will not filter out chemical smells or chemical particles. So chemical respirator is a good thing to have in your shop. I don't usually use one. I'm usually outdoors when I'm doing this stuff, or I'm in a well-ventilated area. That's usually good enough. So you just don't want to stand over it and breathe it in too much. Like I said, I want to bring this inside where it's a little bit warmer, because this stuff should be curing and setting up, the tung oil, that is, in a warmer setting where it can set properly, and I think it's rated for room temperature. So I'm gonna flip this over one more time and just kind of redistribute the stuff on the other side. I'm gonna try not to touch it again to that plastic, and we're gonna go inside and we're gonna put this down on our under our range on our stove, and we're gonna get the vent going, so we're ventilating the gases from our kitchen. But there we'll have some warmer temperatures where we should be able to get good ventilation. So after this gun bluing dries on here, or after it's been on for about 15 minutes or so, we're going to go ahead and wash it off with a Windex, and we're going to neutralize the acid effect. We'll wipe off any excess with the towel that's not dried, and then yeah, the ammonia in the Windex will neutralize the acid. You can also use like a watered down ammonia, but I got a bottle of Windex right in there ready to go. So we'll just let this etch for a little bit longer. Check on the bottle and see what that says for etch time. But I think we're probably getting pretty close, and it's darkening up nicely. So we've got a good dark text there. And this is Old English text. And this is the We the People Bowie. And we are Dark Angel Cutlery. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or things that you can think of asking that I didn't discuss, let me know. I'd be happy to share anything else with you that I know. Again, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in.